Wilhelm Reich, 24th of March 1897 to 3rd of November 1957, was an Austrian doctor of medicine and psychoanalyst. He was from the second generation of analysts, following on from Sigmund Freud. Both his parents were Jewish, but they decided against raising him as a Jew. He was brought up to speak only German, was punished for using Yiddish, and forbidden from playing with the local Yiddish-speaking children. Reich began having, I don't know if I can say it, bleep with the family's chambermaid at the age of 12. Reich remembered that his father had called his mother a whore after she had a brief affair with one of Wilhelm's tutors. Cecilia Reich drank a mixture of lie and died. After the First World War broke out, Russian troops swept through Bukovina, and Reich narrowly escaped being sent to Russia as a hostage, and had to flee his home, leaving it and his possessions forever. During the First World War, Reich was an officer in the Austrian army and served in the Italian Alps. He seemed to enjoy military life, which probably appealed to his desire for experience. Reich first met Sigmund Freud in 1919 when he asked Freud for a reading list for a seminar concerning, I don't know if I can say this, but it's the bleep word denology. It seems that they left a strong impression on each other. Freud allowed him to meet with patients, even though Reich was just 22 years old and still an undergraduate. A young nursery teacher with whom Reich had a liaison became pregnant. She underwent an illegal abortion and died. After graduating in medicine from the public University of Vienna in 1922, Reich became deputy director of Freud's outpatient clinic, the Vienna Ambulatorium. During the 1930s, he was part of the reconciliation by Frankfurt sociologists of Freudian psychoanalysis with Marxism, although strictly speaking not a part of the Frankfurt School itself. He was accepted as a member of the Vienna Psychoanalytic Association and began his own analysis with Isidor Sadger. He lived and worked out of an apartment on Bergasse 7, the same street on which Freud lived at number 19. One of Freud's patients was Laura Kahn, a 19-year-old woman with whom he had an affair. Despite Freud having warned analysts not to involve themselves with their patients, Kahn became ill in November 1920 and died of sepsis after sleeping in a bitterly cold room she had rented in order to meet with Reich. 2 months after Kahn's death, Reich accepted her friend Annie Pink, 1902 to 1971, as a patient. He had an affair with her too, and married her in 1922 at her father's insistence. Annie Reich, as she became known, was herself a well-known psychoanalyst. They had 2 daughters, Ava, 1924 to 2008, and Laura, born in 1928, both of whom became physicians. Laura Reich-Ruben became a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. After graduating as a doctor, he worked in internal medicine at the city's University Hospital and studied neuropsychology from 1922 to 1924 at the hospital's neurological and psychiatric clinic under Professor Julius Wagner von Jaugreg. In 1922, Reich began working in Freud's psychoanalytical outpatient clinic, known as the Vienna Ambulatorium, at Pellingasse 18. Reich became the assistant director under Hirschman in 1924 and worked there until 1930. Between 1922 and 1932, the clinic offered free or low-cost psychoanalysis to 1,445 men and 800 women, many of whom were suffering from shell shock following on from World War I. As he listened to his patients, his attention kept straying to their bodies, lying guarded and rigid on the couch. Could it be that they were communicating information that couldn't be said in words? Maybe the past wasn't just housed in the memory, as Freud believed, but stowed in the body as well. Reich moved away from treating neurological symptoms to observing chaotic lifestyles and antisocial personalities. Reich argued that neurotic symptoms such as obsessive-compulsive disorder were an unconscious attempt to gain control of a hostile environment, including poverty and childhood abuse. They were what he called examples of character armour or character panzer, repetitive patterns of behaviour, speech and body posture that served as defence mechanisms. Reich joined the faculty of the Psychoanalytic Institute in Vienna in 1924 and became its director of training. He was well regarded for the weekly technical seminars he chaired at the Ambulatorium, where he gave papers on his theory of character structure, arguing that psychoanalysis should be based on the examination of unconscious character traits, later known as ego defences. Reich contracted TB and in 1927 spent several weeks in the winter in a sanatorium in Davos, Switzerland. Several months later, he and Anna were out on the streets during the July Revolt of 1927 in Vienna, when 84 workers were shot and killed by police and another 600 were injured. It seemed that experience changed Reich. He wrote that it was his first encounter with human irrationality. He began to doubt everything and in 1928 joined the Communist Party of Austria. Reich accepted the Marxist premise that the working class had been exploited by the owners of capital. However, he did not detect a revolutionary spirit within the workers, that the revolution was not taking place. Again, this was a preoccupation of the Frankfurt School, but somehow Reich was much less pessimistic than someone like Adorno, for example. It seemed to Reich at this point that neither Marxian nor Freudian theory, while each contained a certain grain, if you like, of truth, could themselves account for the political and social realities that were taking place across Europe. Almost that Marx lacked an adequate psychology while Freud lacked an adequate sociology. Reich had always been intensely interested in bleep, and he considered whether the energy he'd unleashed was the same that Freud termed libido. At the same time, Freud taught that all the symptoms sprang from disturbances in sexuality. If uncharged bleep energy caused neurosis, mightn't it follow that the discharge of bleep energy was in itself a healing force? Reich suspected that orgasm was the body's innate way of releasing tension, dissolving the rigid armour of trauma and unhappiness in a rush of fluid libidinous energy. Indeed, he went on to claim that it was intrinsically anti-fascist and that they prevent totalitarianism. Reich believed that contraceptives should be available to everyone, that childhood sexuality should be affirmed, that bleep relationships between unmarried young adults were healthy, that young people were entitled to shelter for the purpose of engaging in bleep, that abortion should be legalised and having children to bind a marriage harmed them. Partly in response to the brutality of the July Revolt, Reich then then at the age of 30, opened 6 free bleep counselling clinics in the city in 1927 for working class patients. Each clinic was overseen by a physician with 3 obstetricians and a lawyer on call, and offered what Reich later called bleep pole counselling. Reich offered a mixture of psychoanalytic counselling, Marxist advice and contraceptives, and argued for bleep permissiveness, including for young people, the unmarried, that unsettled other psychoanalysts and the political left. The clinics were immediately overcrowded by people seeking its help. He took to the streets in a mobile clinic, driving to parks and out of the suburbs with other psychoanalysts and physicians. Reich would talk to teenagers and men while gynecologists fitted the women with contraceptive devices, and Leah Lansky spoke to the children. They also distributed bleep education pamphlets door to door. Reich conducted therapy in a most unorthodox fashion. His patients were all but naked during treatment. He induced them to shout, cry, gag, and scream as they escaped their armour. Many thought that he was a cousin of God, he helped so much. And of course this is very similar to the Latian practice within Subud. As you know, I know a number of members of Subud who all claim that Latian itself is somehow life-changing. Reich and his wife moved to Berlin in November 1930. When he set up clinics in working class areas, taught bleep education and published pamphlets, he joined the Communist Party of Germany. God, this is getting so annoying, you know. I'm sure I'm not allowed to say it, but bleep Pol stood for the German Association for a Proletarian Bleepual Policy. Its policies included 1. Better housing conditions for the masses of people. 2. Abolish the laws against abortion and homosexuality. 3. Change marriage and divorce laws. 4. 3. Birth control advice and contraceptives. 5. Health protection of mothers and children. 6. Nurseries in factories and other large employment centres. 7. Abolition of laws prohibiting sex education. Oh, I've said it anyway, sex education. 8. Home leave for prisoners. On the 24th of March 1933, Freud told him that his contact with an international psychoanalytical publisher to publish character analysis had been cancelled. Reich had several affairs during his marriage to Annie Reich, which ended in 1933 after a serious relationship in May 1932 with Elsa Lindenberg, a dancer and pupa of Elsa Grindler. He was living with Lindbergh in Germany when Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933. Unlike most members of the Berlin Psychoanalytical Association, Reich openly opposed the rise of the Nazi Party. On September 2nd, 1933, the Nazi newspaper Volkskirche Beobachter published an attack on Der Sexualkampf der Jugend. Reich and Lindenberg left for Vienna the next day. They moved from Vienna to Denmark, where Reich was excluded from the Danish Communist Party in 1933, without ever having joined it because of his promotion of teenage bleep. There were multiple complaints about his promotion of abortion, bleep education, following the attempted suicide of a teenage patient. When Reich's visa expired, it was not renewed. Reich and Lindenberg moved instead to Malmö in Sweden, where he was placed under surveillance when the police suspected the hourly visits of patients to his hotel room that he was running a brothel with Lindenberg as a prostitute. The government declined to extend his visa, and the couple had to move briefly back to Denmark, Reich under an assumed name. Just before the Lucerne 13th International Congress of Psychoanalysis, Reich was ignorant of the groundswell of opinion against him. At a meeting, he was asked to resign from the International Psychoanalytical Association for prioritising his communist views over Freud's psychoanalytical ideals. Reich protested to Anna Freud, secretary of the International Association, about the omission of his name from the German members of the association, apparently on the spurious grounds that he was going to join the Scandinavian branch. Therefore, it was Anna Freud who ultimately destroyed Reich's reputation and career. In spite of Anna Freud's reaction, Reich's work on character contributed to the development of Anna Freud's The Ego and Mechanisms of Defence, 1936. His idea of muscular armour, which was the expression of personality in the way the body moves, shaped innovations such as body psychotherapy, Gestalt therapy, bioenergetic analysis and primal therapy. His most influential writings include The Impulsive Character, 1925, The Function of the Orgasm, 1927, Character Analysis, 1933, and The Mass Psychology of Fascism, 1933. He also coined the phrase the bleepual revolution, and so many of his ideas became mainstream within family planning and bleepual health. During the 1968 student uprising in Paris and Berlin, students scrawled his name on walls in Berlin and threw copies of The Mass Psychology of Fascism at police. 1924, Reich published a series of papers on the idea of orgastic potency, the ability to release emotions from the muscles and lose the self in an uninhibited orgasm. Reich argued that psychic health and the ability to love depended on organistic potency, the full discharge of the libido. He argued that orgastic potency was the goal of character analysis. Whereas Reich's work on character was well received by the psychoanalytical community, his work on orgastic potency was unpopular from the start, and later it was ridiculed. Nevertheless, abstinence, including celibacy, are common practices within both religions and magic. It's believed that withholding the orgasm leads to a build-up of energy, and important religious or occult revelations occur as a result. In October 1944, Reich and Limburg moved to Oslo, Norway, where Harald K. Segerup, a professor of psychology at the University of Oslo, had invited Reich to lecture on character analysis and what Reich called vegetotherapy. They ended up staying for 5 years. Vegetotherapy comes from the theory of stored emotions, where emotions build tensions in the structure of the body. This tension can be seen in a shallow and restricted posture, facial expression, muscular stress, particularly in circular muscles, and low libido, good bleepual function, and unrestricted natural breathing are seen as evidence of recovery. During his time in Norway, Reich attempted to locate his orgasm theory in biology, exploring whether Freud's metaphor of the libido was in fact electrical or chemical substance, an argument Freud had promoted in the 1890s and then abandoned it. Indeed, Freud was highly critical of Reich for proposing this. Reich argued that conceiving of orgasm as nothing but mechanical tension and relaxation could not explain some of the experience pleasure, that some experience pleasure, but not others. He wanted to know what additional element had to be present for the pleasure to be felt. Reich was influenced by the work of Austrian internist Friedrich Krauss, who argued that the biosystem was really like a relay-like switch mechanism of electrical charge and discharge. From 1934 to 1935, Reich conducted what he called bion experiments. He examined protozoa and grew cultures using grass, sand, iron, and animal tissue, boiling them and adding potassium and gelatin. Having heated the materials to incandescence, he believed there was a rudimentary form of life, halfway between life and non-life. He wrote that when he poured the cooled mixture onto growth media, bacteria were born, dismissing the idea that the bacteria were already present in the air or on other materials. During his 5 years in Oslo, he coined the term orgone enemy, from orgasm and organism, for the notion of life energy. Just before the outbreak of World War II, he moved to New York. After having accepted a position as assistant professor at the New School of Social Research. In 1940, he started building orgone accumulators, which were modified Faraday cages that he claimed were beneficial for cancer patients. These were wooden cupboards about the size of a telephone booth, lined with metal and insulated with steel wool. He claimed that in his laboratory cancer mice had made remarkable positive effects from being kept in a Faraday cage, so he built human-sized versions where one could sit inside. This led to newspaper stories about bleep boxes that cured cancer. In Roger Vadim's Barbarella 1968, the evil scientist Durand seemed to be based on Reich, and he uses a form of orgone accumulator as an instrument of torture when he attempts unsuccessfully to kill Jane Fonda with pleasure. Whilst Aldous Huxley wrote in his 1946 preface to Brave New World, as political and economic freedom diminishes, bleepual freedoms tends to compensatingly increase. This echoed the critique of Frankfurt School theorist Herbert Marcuse, amongst others, on Reich's views. In 1951, Reich said that he'd discovered another energy he called deadly orgone radiation, or DOR, accumulations of which played a role in desertification. He designed a cloudbuster, rows of 15-foot aluminium pipes mounted on mobile platform, connected to cables that were inserted into water. He believed that it could unblock orgone energy in the atmosphere and cause rain. During a drought in 1953, two farmers in Maine offered to pay him if he could make it rain to save their blueberry crop. Reich used the cloudbuster on the morning of January the 6th. Rain began falling that evening. The crop survived. The farmers declared themselves satisfied, and Reich received a fee. From at least early 1954, he came to believe that the planet was under attack by UFOs, which he called energy alphas. He said that he saw them flying over or gone on them, shaped like thin cigars with windows, leaving streams of deadly orgone radiation in their wake, which he believed the aliens were scattering to destroy the Earth. Because of his radical past, Reich had been placed under surveillance almost as soon as he arrived in America, and he was interned at the outbreak of war under suspicion of being a communist. His FBI file is actually 789 pages long. After the Soviet invasion of Finland, however, he became a committed anti-Stalinist. He rejected politics and now referred to the self-regulating bleepual utopia of his imagination as work democracy, which many of his fans amongst the American avant-garde identified as eroticized anarchy. Following two critical articles about him in the New Republic and Harper's in 1947, the US Food and Drug Administration obtained an injunction against the interstate shipment of orgone accumulators and associated literature, calling them fraud of the first magnitude. In fact, Reich hadn't directly done this, but an associate dealing with his accumulators had. The FDA spent an estimated $2 million investigating and prosecuting Reich. Charged with contempt in 1956 for having violated the injunction, Reich was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. That summer, over 6 tons of his publications were burned by public order of the court. He died in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania Penitentiary, of heart failure just over a year later. It's easy to be critical of Reich, especially as he seemed to develop extreme paranoia in his latter years. But given all the trauma in his life, is this unexpected? Furthermore, New Agers have taken to Reich's concept of orgone to sell cheaply made orgonite trinkets. They're made from a combination of quartz crystal, metals and polyester resin. They're said to transmute non-organic orgonite and transmute non-organic radiation and dead radiation, the DOR, into natural healing, organic, positive orgone energy, POR. This is said to occur as soon as the matrix of crystals and metals bind together within the polyester resin. That this is the piezoelectric effect, thus making orgonite a positive energy generator. Certainly during his lifetime, Reich was subjected to a character assassination by the scientific community, including by one of my own heroes, Carl Jung. This is despite him having contributed some major theories within psychology. It is therefore so difficult to critically evaluate his theories. As a young man, Reich certainly seemed to speak to me. Maybe this was a reflection of the amount of testosterone flowing through my body, as I am now much more cynical. But then if our beliefs are so influenced by chemical composition, and in particular hormones, does this not validate Reich's theories rather than negate them? Even now as an older man, I've started to realise that illness is ultimately psychosomatic. Therefore all medicine is ultimately a placebo. So why be sceptical of orgone when many people have suggested that it actually does work? Indeed, could this not be what the Chinese call qi and the Tanaga Dalam of Southeast Asia? Maybe even the ether of classical theory, and indeed Nicholas Tesla. Maybe, however, Reich's genius is even more profound. I've become preoccupied with how we co-create our reality through our beliefs. That somehow there is a linkage between our thoughts and the universe. Again, wasn't Reich tapping into exactly this? There appears to be a missing variable which links consciousness and creation. Is this related to the missing variable which unites classical and quantum physics? Was Reich actually so far removed from the truth in suggesting that this could be orgone?